Hi 7-6, this is your last lesson of the based on Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and your first lesson of this new half term, and the final half term to this really strange year. So I'd like you to open a new page in your exercise book if that's where you're working, or begin a new article on Word, a new document on Word, and put the title as the Break-In at Gringotts Bank newspaper article. So this is going to be your next task, and the work in this lesson works up towards being able to complete that task. So once you've done that, I want you to then list under your title as many different names of newspapers that you know. So can you think of any that your parents might read? You might read some yourself. You might have seen some at your grandparents' house or just in the shops. List as many names as you can think of. Maybe pause the video, that would be a good idea. And then we're going to see if we've come up with some similar ideas. So hopefully you've got a nice list of various newspapers. Now, I've listed some here. These are all British newspapers. And I've put them into 3 different coloured boxes. So we have a group in the green box, a group in an orange box, and a group in a blue box. I want you to look at how these are grouped together and have a think. Do you know what we call the 3 categories that these have been grouped into? So maybe pause again and have a think. Some of you might know, some of you might not have a clue. So the next slide gives you the answer. So the newspapers in the green box here, we refer to these as tabloid newspapers. There'll be an explanation as to what this means on the next slide. In the orange box, hopefully you could have come up with that yourself or had an idea of what we might call these. These are local or regional newspapers. So we've got the Haverhill Echo and the Cambridge Evening News. And then in the blue box, we've got a list of broadsheet newspapers. So here we have a definition of a tabloid, a local or regional or broadsheet newspaper. So a tabloid newspaper are usually smaller in size than a standard newspaper, and they focus on less serious content as a rule. So they might focus on celebrity culture, sports, and sensationalist crime stories. So if there's been a crime committed, often what they write about and the way they write it will come across as far more dramatic. We call it sensationalised, sensationalist. Those in the orange box, as we said, it's a local or a regional newspaper. So the Haverhill Echo, the Cambridge Evening News, they cover events locally, and the events they cover usually wouldn't be of interest to another locality or area. So for instance, when the Haverhill Echo comes up to school and reports on maybe a drama performance, or if we've had an important visitor or some work students have been doing, it's of interest to the town and the local area, but somebody in Yorkshire wouldn't be interested, probably, unless they were your nan or something like that. But that's why they're in local newspapers. Now a broadsheet newspaper, the clue's kind of in the title. So they're what we refer to now as a standard or a full-size newspaper. So broadsheets are usually really big. I remember my grandparents, they always got the Independent, and they would sit there, and also the Guardian, I believe, and they'd sit there at the breakfast table whenever we stayed with them, and they'd open out the newspaper, and it would spread right across the table. They're huge. So broadsheet, they are broad in size. Now they take a much more serious look at major news stories. They often report a lot more facts. The content's much more serious. Often it takes into account a lot more international news, different cultural news. So the main difference here are between tabloid in the green box and the broadsheet in the blue. So this is relevant because when you write your newspaper article, I'd like you to decide, do you want to either write it as a tabloid, so sensationalise the crime of the robbery at the bank. It might have a slightly less serious tone, or a broadsheet, so very much a serious tone in your writing. You're really looking at the facts and picking it apart that way. So that would be something you might want to decide on. So the main task will be to create your own front page of the Daily Prophet, which will be the name of the newspaper, reporting on the robbery at Gringotts. So we'll come on to the exact instructions for that picked apart later on. But we need to think about what features do front pages of newspapers have and what you need to include. So here we have an image of a front page from a long time ago. And I've put some captions next to the various important things we need to think about including in our front pages. So this is for the Daily Mail, so that's a tabloid newspaper. So we've got the name, date and price. This is also called the masthead sometimes, the main name of the newspaper. A second headline, which is a smaller version of the main headline. So the main headline is in the boldest print. Doesn't always have to be at the very top. You can see here they've put it slightly lower. And then the second headline, which brings a little bit more detail into the main headline. So the main headline is "Give us a £40,000 pay rise." And this was all about the parliamentary expenses claims that happened some years ago. So the second heading then says, "After Minister claims £60,000 for a parent's home, MPs come up with their own solution to expenses row." So it goes into a little bit more depth of what the headline is. So the main headline is often very short, catchy. Doesn't always have to be grammatically correct. The second headline then goes in and gives you more information. You would then have an introduction, which is often in more bolder print. Or more bold print, you can't have a double positive. That would again lead you on to the main information of the article. And then the main body, so this is where you'd have the main content of the article. Often it will be continued in the main newspaper, so you don't want to go into extreme detail here. You just won't have the space either, so you're going to want to summarise all the main events, details and information in the main body. You'd also want to make sure there's a date and a price on your newspaper. Come up with that yourself. A photograph, so you want a picture, an image or a photo that's relevant to your main story. A caption under your photograph, which will tell you what the photograph is. So your photograph or image might be Gringotts Bank, or it could be the lead suspect. And underneath you would say image of Gringotts Bank, which experienced a break-in on, something like that. And also some quotes. So often these newspapers will interview key witnesses, the police maybe. They might even interview a suspect. So you'd want to include some quotes of the people that were involved in the break-in. So what I'd like you to do is copy down these main points of what you'd need to include in your newspaper article. So if you can just copy the information in these 4 boxes, ideally all of the information, but at least I'd like you to copy down the titles of what you need to include. So we then just have a summary, so I'm going to just whiz through these of what these all are. You can pause them if you need to go over them a bit more. So the masthead, which is the name of the newspaper. So here we've got the Daily Express. A masthead is the name of the newspaper itself. You would then have your headline, "Road Rage at Runcorn Rally." Some of you with your eagle eyes might notice something about this headline. Is there a language technique in this headline? Look at all the R's. If so, what technique is it? And why might that be important in a headline? We'll come back to that. A headline is a title to attract the reader's attention to that article. They're usually short, catchy, bold, and often in capital letters. You then want an image of something that's happened that links to the main event. So the photo links to someone or something that the article is about. The article is about. This article here is about a rally and that there's been road rage. And this image here is a car crashed into Specsavers, which is quite ironic, really, when you consider that Specsavers deal with sight and eye problems, since that famous advert should have gone to Specsavers. So maybe the driver should have paid heed to that. There's usually at least 2 main columns at the front of a newspaper with the main body of information in. So you want 2 columns. You don't just want it written across the page like so in prose. You want 2 columns. Quotations. So this is an example. A spectator said it was horrendous. The customer just smashed into the side of the shop. It was horrid. Comments taken directly from people involved in the report or connected to the report. So, like we said, people that they've interviewed. Subheading is a smaller heading to break up the story, making it easier to read, usually in italics. So a lucky escape. It could be that then your subheading might say lucky escape, and that's where you would then get your quote from somebody describing how awful the crash was and how, therefore why it was a lucky escape. Your byline is who the article's by, so it would be by Mrs Sheehan, by whoever else you are that is writing the article. And then again a photo caption, so you've got your image. The one we just saw was the one of the car crashed into Specsavers. So the photo caption here just says, above, the Citroen that crashed into Specsavers. So this is another summary of the different vocabulary that's relevant and the definitions of what these things are. So you might want to pause and read through and make some notes. Now, of course, some of you might not remember the exact details of the robbery, so it would be a good idea now for your second task to remind yourself of the robbery at Gringotts using the text. So task 2, make notes on the key events, information, characters of interest and details of the robbery. So when did it happen, who are the suspects, what was stolen, what damage was done, and was there a motive? So you need to find out the answers to these questions. So there's certain elements that you need to include in your newspaper article, which we've just run through, but there's also a certain way and style of writing the newspaper article, which we're going to have a quick look at now. So what must we remember to include when writing our articles? So your opening paragraph is there to hook in the reader, so they want to read that and think, oh, this article sounds interesting, I'd like to read on. So because of that, you want it to have some key facts in, but also make it interesting. So you want to know who was involved, what happened, so the robbery. So the who was involved was Quirrell Quirrell, and he did it on behalf of Voldemort. Where the event took place, which of course is at Gringotts. When, so when did it happen? How the event happened, so you might not know exactly how it happened, but you'll have some detail from the text. And then why did it take place? Why did Voldemort want to rob Gringotts? What was there? Hint, the Philosopher's Stone that he wanted to get hold of. Also, what were the bank themselves saying? Were they saying that nothing had been stolen, or were they acknowledging that something was missing? So, something that's really important is when you think about these who, why, what, where and when and how, you need to remember that when the reports in newspapers are written, it's straight after the event has happened. Therefore, rarely do the police and reporters have all the facts. So much of what newspapers write is speculation, or we call it guesswork. That's what speculation means. They might not have all the facts. So although you might know them all because you've read the book, it would be good for you to imagine that you're reporting on this just after it's happened, and some of the things that you want to say you're not 100% sure of. So you might want to speculate that it was Quirrell Quirrell. You might want to speculate it was the Philosopher's Stone. Don't necessarily give all the information away. Raise some questions, give hints as to what's happened. Don't just give all the facts, because often that isn't the case when something's a big crime's just taken place. We don't instantly know all the facts normally. Now, if you're not sure how to begin, and here's a little example of some sentence starters. So your introduction: the Bank of Gringotts was blank. It is widely believed to be the work of whoever. A break-in took place at, so you'd say where and when. The break-in, how it happened. It is said to be because of, and what was the reason. So another thing that's really important to include in articles like this is emotive language. And it makes the readers feel something when they read it. So instead of saying that somebody was scared, say that they were terrified. Say that it's caused agony to the workers at Gringotts. You know, they've been left terrified. They're tortured by the memories of the break-in, or of the morning when they went in and found they'd been broken into. So try not to use boring words. Use more emotive words, some interesting words. So that's another thing I'll be looking for when marking your work. Now, if you're a challenge student, or you fancy a bit of a challenge, I want you to try and make your newspaper headline a little bit more skillful. So we saw earlier that there was the newspaper heading with various R's in it. So I think it was about a rally and Runcorn. And I asked you to think about what technique that might be. So that was alliteration. So when you repeat the first letter or sound of each word. I'd like you to try and come up with headings, a headline that includes one, if not possibly all three of these. Just makes the headlines a lot more interesting and a lot more fun, particularly if you've chosen to do a tabloid type newspaper, article. If you want it to sound a little bit less serious, maybe not be quite so factually based, this would be a nice thing to do. You could include some exclamation marks and some emotive language techniques. So this is your task. There's 4 different scenarios, and I want you to try and come up with a headline for each one using one or all of these 3. So alliteration, exclamation, emotive language. You might want to use 2 of them. So if you can just pause the video now, come up with some headlines for those 4, have a little practice, and then we'll restart and look at what I've put. So hopefully you've had a go at that. So for the rugby game with the Samoans, I went for a Samoan smash, ? A Samoan smash, will they win? So we've got some alliteration there. For the lottery winners in Cambridge, a Cambridge couple cashed in. Some more alliteration there. For the underground safety procedures that needed to be put in place for the what do you call it? Completely gone blank. The train that goes under the channel to France, Euro tunnel. Officials demand safety! ! And for the final boxing match, David's defeat versus Nikolai knockout. So a bit of emotive language there, some alliteration and an exclamation mark. And just remember that each of these titles, headlines, all are using less than 5 words ideally. So to summarise, your main task is to create your own front page of the Daily Prophet reporting on the robbery at Gringotts. Your front page must include the masthead, or the name of the paper, the date, the price, the main headline. Make it interesting and catchy. Your photograph or picture that's related to the article, a caption underneath stating what that is, an introduction, a main body and quotes. Include some emotive language. Leave some questions unanswered, e.g. police are yet to apprehend any suspects. For challenge, if you can include some really sophisticated vocabulary, make inferences about possible motives based on what you've learned from the book. So use your imagination a bit more. Try and craft the piece with some sophisticated vocabulary. Use the thesaurus online, and that could link into your emotive language as well. If you feel that this is a bit challenging, to make it easier, in this orange box I've put use the newspaper template, which I've attached on Go for Schools. So there'll be a Word document on there with 3 pages giving information of what you need to do, what to include, and then finally on the final page there's a template which you could either print out if you have access to a printer. If not, you could do it on the computer and then email it to me, or just take inspiration from it and create your own in your book. And also use the sentence starters that we had further back in this lesson. So this will be due in a week today, so Wednesday next week, which I believe will be the 10th of June. Let's double check that. Yes, 10th of June. So due the 10th of June. Any questions, please let me know. I will attach all the documents you need on Go for Schools, and I look forward to seeing what you produce and starting a new topic next week. Take care.